Hello and welcome to this week's video preview of our Bible study on the book of Isaiah. This week's lesson is entitled Great Hope and Massive Destruction, and we're covering chapters 7, 8, and 9 in the first 4 verses of chapter 10. We're going to start with a short video. It's a segment of a longer YouTube video about shipwrecks, and this is a very specific shipwreck. We'll let you watch it here and we'll come back in a second. So before you view it, the activities explain why we might find stories like this so appealing. So you'll watch that shorter portion of the video right now.
The San Jose set sail from Portobello, Panama in May of 1708, but the journey did not go as planned. The ship was only supposed to make a quick stop in Cartagena, Colombia before heading to Spain, but then things took a turn for the worse. The British were coming, and the San Jose was in deep, deep trouble. To say things ended badly for the San Jose would be an understatement. Desolation suspected that the British might be near Cartagena and waiting to stage an ambush, but he pushed forward anyway. If there was an award for most incompetent captain, Desolation would probably win the award. It was a huge miscalculation, and the British made short work of the San Jose. The battle started late in the afternoon on June 8, 1708, and by the time nightfall came, the ship was already underwater. The British fired their cannons relentlessly. The San Jose burst into flames, and the explosion was heard miles away. Only 11 of the San Jose's 600 crew members survived the attack, and 11 million gold and silver coins sank to the ocean floor. The San Jose only made it 25 kilometers off the coast of Cartagena, and likely went down somewhere around Isla Baru. The San Jose sat beneath the sea off the coast of Colombia for over 300 years, and it's still there to this day. However, it's no longer a mystery. The shipwreck was officially discovered on November 27, 2015, thanks to a lot of research and some high-tech deep-sea equipment. We say officially discovered because the wreck may have been first discovered in the early 1980s. More on that later. The discovery wouldn't have been possible without the Remus 6000 robotic submarine. The Autonomous Underwater Vehicle, or AUV, was operated by the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. Thanks to sonar and plenty of pictures, the AUV turned up some incredible results. Researchers knew they had something when the AUV snapped photos of bronze cannons adorned with dolphins, a surefire sign that what they discovered was indeed the San Jose shipwreck.
Why do we find stories like this shipwreck, the San Jose, so interesting or so appealing? Well, a couple of reasons. One, $22 billion sitting at the bottom of the sea is a pretty intriguing thought. So you have this ship that was shot down and sinks to the bottom of the sea, and you have all this treasure that's sitting there just down in the darkness waiting for someone to find it. We think of the bottom of the ocean as a place where there's not a lot of life to be found, and it's dark, and especially those places that are deeper where the sun can't quite reach. But there on the bottom of the ocean floor for maybe about 300 years sat this incredibly valuable treasure just waiting to be found by someone. So the treasure itself is amazing, but the setting in which that treasure was found makes it more interesting, at least to me. Treasure that just sat there in the dark. Well, that's kind of what we have in our lesson for this week. We have 2 sections we're really going to focus on. Isaiah chapter 7 verses 10 to 14 and Isaiah chapter 9 verses 1 to 7. And I believe both those sections will be very familiar to you because we often read them at Advent and Christmas time. In fact, Isaiah 9 was the text I used for my sermon on Christmas Eve. The setting of those 2 gospel messianic promises make them even more interesting. They're incredibly important promises on their own, but when you look at the setting in which they were first given, it just enhances our appreciation of them. So those are really our 2 basic objectives for this lesson. One, understand the beautiful messianic promises contained in those sections. So those one section in chapter 7, 1 in chapter 9. And then appreciate the strange setting in which these promises were first given. So this is a lot of ground to cover, a little over 3 chapters. So we won't read everything. We won't read everything in our when we meet in our Zoom class either. But we'll just sort of give you an overview, a general sense of what's happening in these couple chapters. So this first section I think it's important that we do read through it. So let's read through Isaiah chapter 7, verses 1 to 7. When Ahaz, son of Jotham, son of Uzziah, was king of Judah, King Rezin of Aram and Pekah, son of Remaliah, king of Israel, marched up to fight against Jerusalem, but they could not overpower it. Now the house of David was told, Aram has allied itself with Ephraim. So the hearts of Ahaz and his people were shaken, as the trees of the forest are shaken by the wind. Just to pause there briefly. So Ahaz is the king of the southern tribe of Judah. Now the word Ephraim there, that's a reference to the northern kingdom. That was one of Joseph's sons from hundreds of years before this. But that when you see that word Ephraim, think of that northern kingdom of Israel. So you have Israel and the country of Aram, and they both are really hoping that Judah will join them in the fight against Assyria. That's a lot of names, a lot of countries. We'll show a map in just a second here to help you understand. But Ahaz is resistant to joining with these two kings against Assyria. In fact, it seems he's already reached out to the king of Assyria to ask him for help. So he's trying to ally with these people around, Israel and Aram, and they don't like that so much. So they're coming to attack him. And when Ahaz and the other people of Judah find out that these two countries are coming for them, they're very afraid because they realize they cannot possibly stand against these two countries. Verse 3, the Lord said to Isaiah, go out, you and your son Shear-Jashub, to meet Ahaz at the end of the aqueduct on the upper pool on the road to the launderer's field. A couple things here. So God tells the prophet Isaiah, who's been serving for a couple of years now at this point, tells him to go meet King Ahaz and tell him something. That Isaiah's son, whose name was Shear-Jashub, that means a remnant will return. And later on in the lesson, we'll talk about how Isaiah's sons had names that were essentially either promises of blessing or destruction. So just imagine your kids are a constant reminder of what God has called you to do as messenger to both kingdoms, Israel and Judah. So he tells them, go find Ahaz and give him this message. Ahaz is by the upper pool, probably getting ready for those two kings, Aram and Israel, to come and lay siege to Jerusalem. So he's checking to see, okay, what might they do to attack our water supply? Verse 4. So Isaiah is to say to King Ahaz, be careful, keep calm and don't be afraid. Do not lose heart because of these two smoldering stubs of firewood. That's an interesting way to describe these two kings that have inspired such fear in Ahaz's heart. He calls them two smoldering stubs of firewood. So the picture here is two kingdoms that were once powerful, that were once on fire, but now their power is dwindling and their days are numbered. So Isaiah is full of these great pictures that God gives to tell these important truths. Because of the fierce anger of Rezin and Aram and the sons of Remaliah, Aram, Ephraim, and Remaliah's son have plotted your ruin, saying, let us invade Judah, let us tear it apart and divide it among ourselves and make the son of Tabeel king over it. So God lets Ahaz know, it's real bad from your perspective. These two kings are coming for you, and they have a successor picked out. They're going to take you away, or probably kill you and replace you. But don't lose heart. Why? Verse 7, yet this is what the sovereign Lord says. It will not take place. It will not happen. For the head of Aram is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is only Rezin. Within 65 years, Ephraim too will be shattered to be a people. Will be too shattered to be a people, I should say. The head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is only Remaliah's son. If you do not stand firm in your faith, you will not stand at all. Just to pause here. So God is telling him, don't worry about these two kingdoms. They don't have long. They don't know it, but they don't have very long to go. 65 years, that northern kingdom is going to be completely destroyed. And as you might imagine, God was telling the truth. That northern kingdom, they don't know it, but they are on the brink of destruction. Assyria will come within the next 2 years, actually. And both these kings will be dead within 2 years. And that northern kingdom within the next 65 years will be just, it's gone. It will, over the next 65 years, Assyria will lay waste to that northern kingdom. And one other interesting thing, God has does an interesting thing in verse 9. He doesn't even call the king of Israel by his name. He doesn't refer to him as Pekah. He calls him Remaliah's son. So demonstrating his opinion of this king of the northern kingdom doesn't hold him in very high regard, doesn't even mention his name. Now here's the interesting part. Here are these 5 verses that are messianic. Verse 10. Again the Lord spoke to Ahaz, ask the Lord your God for a sign, whether in the deepest depths or in the highest heights. But Ahaz said, I will not ask. I will not put the Lord to the test. Then Isaiah said, hear now, you house of David. Is it not enough to try the patience of humans? Will you try the patience of my God also? Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son and will call him Emmanuel. He will be eating curds and honey when he knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right. For before the boy knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right, the land of the 2 kings you dread will be laid waste. The Lord will bring on you and your people, and on the house of your father, a time unlike any since Ephraim broke away from Judah. He will bring the king of Assyria. All right, let's put up a map here to help hopefully clarify things. I'll make this a little bigger here. So you can see the blue double arrow shows Israel and Judah were once a united kingdom. So when you think of Israel, for the most part, you think of the United Kingdom. You don't think of Israel and Judah. That's toward the end of their time in history, the Old Testament. But you think of David and Solomon ruling this United Kingdom. But they had split at this point and had done so for several hundred years. So that bottom arrow that shows you Jerusalem, that's where Ahaz is right now. So that's Judah. The northern kingdom of Israel, that second arrow from the bottom, that's what we're talking about when we refer to Ephraim, and Pekah is in charge of that. That next arrow, for moving sort of clockwise, the kingdom of Aram and Damascus, that's Rezin. So Israel and Aram Damascus had united together. And that last arrow, the top right corner, is pointing to Assyria. Those are the guys that Israel and Aram are hoping to avoid. Or very much, at least they're hoping that Ahaz will join with them and they can have 3 countries as sort of a coalition against Assyria. But what they don't realize is that Ahaz in Jerusalem has already reached out to Tiglath-Pileser in Assyria. And Assyria is going to be coming for the northern kingdom and for Aram. And as we said, within 2 years, those 2 kings will be dead. And the first phase of their destruction will take about 12 years or so. And unfortunately, because Ahaz is so wicked and rejected God along with most of the people of Judah, well, Assyria is then going to come for Judah as well and destroy most of the country except for Jerusalem. Number 1, we'll talk about that in our Zoom class. It says, fill in the blank as many ways as you can. It's amazing that God promises the northern kingdom and Aram will not conquer Judah because, just think about a couple reasons why that would be pretty amazing that God would take the time to do that. Number 2 is talking about Ahaz, and just we won't get into that too much now, but just think through that God told this wicked king Ahaz, who wanted nothing to do with the true God of Israel. God came to him, essentially gave him a blank check, like he had in ways given to King Solomon many years before this, goes to Ahaz and says, don't worry about these 2 kings. I know you're freaking out because these 2 kings are at your doorstep and they're coming for you. Be calm. Don't panic because I'm not going to let that happen to you. You're a wicked king, but you're part of the line of David. And I've made promises about the Davidic line of kings. And if you don't believe me, Ahaz, which I assume you won't, ask me for any sign, and I'll give you whatever sign. I mean, just think of the things Ahaz could have asked God to see. But Ahaz puts on this big show of false piety. In verse 12, he says, I will not ask. I will not put the Lord to the test. So he's quoting Deuteronomy. Had said, do not put the Lord your God to the test. But Ahaz isn't being sincere. He doesn't care about the true God of Israel. He doesn't care about this prophet Isaiah. He thinks it's all a joke. He's busy with the gods of the nations around them, and more than that, he feels pretty confident in himself. So rather than trust in God, he's already made this plan to reach out to Assyria. I'm going to ally with them, which God had forbidden them from doing. But he's confident that he can work his way out of the situation on his own. And God is rightfully angry at Ahaz, but then gives him this promise that the virgin will be with child. So that to me is so interesting. That's part of the treasure on the bottom of the sea thing. Within this righteous anger that God has for Ahaz and the rest of the people who had rejected him around here, comes this beautiful treasure of a promise. The virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son, and you will call him Emmanuel. Let's talk about that concept of being born in a virgin. So Some critics of the Bible take that Hebrew word alma, which we think of as virgin, and they say, well, it just means a young woman. So the prophet Isaiah, God through the prophet Isaiah is just saying a young woman will have a child. So they sort of discredit the miraculous nature of the virgin birth there. A couple notes there apologetically. So Alma is used 6 times in the Old Testament, each time referring to a woman of marriageable age who is still a virgin. There are a couple different words that Isaiah could have picked if he meant just your run-of-the-mill young woman, but it appears that he's using this word specifically to talk about someone who could be married but is not. Someone who is a virgin, someone who is not committed adultery before marriage. So it is a highly specific Hebrew word that suggests someone like Mary, someone who was of marriageable age but had not yet either taken a spouse or committed adultery. The second point there, a normal birth would not really qualify as a sign for Ahaz. So remember this, the setting here is important. God had said, Ahaz, ask for any sign. Ahaz said, no. And God said, well, you're getting a sign anyway. So just a woman having a child, that's a beautiful thing, but it's something that happens a lot. So would that really qualify as a sign to Ahaz? A young woman will be with child. The setting here would point us to something more magnificent, a sign like a virgin giving birth. That's a miracle. Two other points here. Pinpointing a specific virgin and child with the direct article, the definite article there, the. So it seems highly specific rather than just a woman will be having a child. And then if you go to the New Testament, Matthew 1, really takes this verse from Isaiah 7 and sees it as being fulfilled in Mary and Jesus. Now, all this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. So the New Testament certainly sees this as the promise of a virgin birth. Number 4 says, come up with 2 or 3 reasons why Emmanuel separates Christianity from every other spiritual worldview. Good to take some time and think about that. God being with us, God being one of us. Vicar just preached about that section from Hebrews, is that Hebrews 2, where it says that Jesus is not ashamed to call us his brothers and sisters. So a God who would join our human race, being true man, to take our place. How does that separate Christianity from every other world religion or spiritual worldview? We'll talk about that more in our Zoom meeting. Okay, moving on next, there's an important concept. You may have heard of this before if you've talked about Old Testament prophecy, but when we look at the Old Testament prophets, sometimes we use the concept of approaching a mountain range. So I have a picture of driving toward the Rocky Mountains here. And when you're a distance away from mountains, they all appear to be sort of on the same, I guess we would say, plane, I guess, that it seems to be they're all in a row. But as you get closer, you realize, well, some are closer to you, some are further away. So it's only when you get into the mountain range itself, you realize, oh, it's not one single line of mountain peaks. It just looked like that from a distance, but there's depth here. When the prophets are making their prophecies, their promises of the future, I sometimes see these things happening simultaneously, when really some of them there's what we would call an immediate fulfillment, and then there's also a fulfillment down the line in the future. So when Isaiah is talking about the virgin being with child, he's also promising judgment to Ahaz and judgment to these 2 kings of Aram in Israel. So in the very next chapter, you have Isaiah being blessed with another child who also seems to be a type of Christ. That word type just means someone who points us to Jesus, who isn't the Messiah, but makes us think about what Jesus would do. So you have a virgin will be with child. That's talking about Jesus. But you also have God telling Ahaz, within the next 2 or 3 years, a child will be born. And before that child is 2 or 3 years old, the destruction of these two kingdoms will take place. So a little bit confusing, but it gets a little easier to understand if you use that mountain range thing. So from Isaiah's perspective, all these things are sort of happening at once. In his prophetic view that God has given him, it's like Mary is pregnant with Jesus already, even though we know that's not going to happen in history for another 730 years or so. So Isaiah is speaking all in one section, speaking about things that are going to happen in the next 3 years, the next 65 years, and the next 750 years. That can be confusing, but if you understand the prophetic not worldview, but prophetic view of what God is instructing him to say here, then it gets a little bit clearer. So there's concepts of curds and honey. He talks about curds and honey in verse 15. You will be eating curds and honey. That is, it seems, there's a couple ways to interpret that, but the way that seems best is that curds and honey were not a sign of great wealth, and certainly not a sign of if that was your diet, it wasn't a sign that you or your country were doing really well. These were very simple things that someone could eat if they lived off the land with just, a single cow or things like that. You think of John the Baptist, who certainly was living a very humble life, and honey was a part of his diet out in the wilderness. So God is promising within the next 2 to 3 years, the next 12 to 13 years, that first stage of the desolation of the northern kingdom is going to take place. And the part of that desolation is just financial ruin, the destruction of these fields and things like that. So for the people of Israel, and ultimately for the people of Judah, things are going to be really hard. And it will be shown in their diet that they're not going to be able to eat fancy rich people things, because their country is going to be pretty miserable. If you extend that out, you think of the country into which Jesus was born as a Jewish man in Israel. Israel was not doing well at the time. They had been destroyed by one world power after the other. We talked about that in our study of the book of Daniel. But the area where Jesus grew up had been ravaged by just so many battles they really didn't even have a part in. They just happened to be sort of the in-between ground between bigger countries. So when Jesus was born, Israel as a country they had already been overrun by the Roman Empire, and just not doing well socioeconomically. So curds and honey, he was sort of born into that sort of lifestyle too, not a very wealthy family. All right, let's move on to Assyria, the Lord's instrument. Oh, I do have a picture of the curds and honey here. That's obviously modern curds and honey mixed together, but just think a very simple, cheap diet. Next section, we're going to kind of skip over it. Assyria, the Lord's instrument. That's chapter 7, 18 to 25. So we talked about Assyria and how worried Aram and Israel were about them. And they should have been worried, because God was using Assyria as a tool. And one of the things Isaiah tells Ahaz is that the Lord will use a razor hired from beyond the Euphrates River, the king of Assyria. Sometimes prophecies are fairly vague about what's going to happen. It just says, okay, some country is going to come in and do God's will. Here it's very specific. Assyria, God says. He pinpoints Assyria and calls them a razor. Now, at this time, to forcibly have your beard shaved by an enemy was shameful. Or if you were in a time of mourning or grief, you might shave your own beard as a sign of how miserable you were. So beards were the norm. To not have a beard was an indication that something bad was going on. So God tells Ahaz, look, this king of Assyria is going to come in, and he's going to bring great disgrace and humiliation to these two kingdoms, and as we'll hear, to Judah as well, because of the rejection of God by Ahaz and the rest of the people in his empire. The next section is titled Special Names. We won't spend a lot of time on that today in this video. Maybe we'll do that more in the Zoom, but just know this. God tells Isaiah has another son, and God tells him to name him a very special name. That name is Maher Shalal Hashbaz, which means quick to the plunder, swift to the spoil. It's an interesting name in and of itself. It's a promise of both blessing and destruction. So quick to the plunder means that Judah is going to enjoy Israel, the northern kingdom's destruction, but at the same time, they're going to be swift to their own destruction as well. Let's move on to promise of destruction. I'm on the top of page 3 if you're following along the student guide. There's about 6 verses there in which the destruction of the people is made very clear. And the verse I highlight is, because this people has rejected the gently flowing waters of Shiloah and rejoices over Rezin and the sons of Remaliah, therefore the Lord is about to bring against them the mighty flood waters of the Euphrates, the king of Assyria with all his pomp. Just another place to appreciate the imagery God uses in the wordplay he uses in the book of Isaiah. So when he's talking about the waters of Shiloah, that's waters around Jerusalem. So essentially he's saying, because the northern kingdom has rejected worshiping me, well, I'm going to bring flood waters from across the Euphrates, which is the Assyrian army, and they're going to destroy this area. Next is a section titled Warnings for Isaiah. And this is specifically a section where God is speaking to the prophet Isaiah and giving him some warnings about what life's going to be like for him with the sort of calling that he had. Isaiah was like many of the other Old Testament prophets in that part of his role was to harden the hearts of the people. That is to say, he would proclaim God's message of judgment and hope, and by his proclamation, the people would reject God. That they directly heard promises of God. They directly heard encouragement from God to repent, these dramatic, overtures to come back to him. And much of Isaiah's ministry would be rejected. Jeremiah was a lot like that too. Ezekiel in a big way too, that many of these prophets came directly from God and they were rejected by the people. And a few people would believe, but most of Israel, most of Judah would reject them. And so God is telling Isaiah, well, here are some things you need to understand and remember, because it's going to be bad for you. We'll talk about two of those things in our Zoom, numbers 6 and 7. Do not call conspiracy everything this people calls a conspiracy. That was a big problem for this southern kingdom. That as Isaiah was telling both the north and southern kingdom, disaster's coming, repent. A lot of the false prophets of both of these kingdoms were saying, no, it's fine. It's going to be peace. This guy Isaiah and everybody else is telling you things are going to be bad. That's just this conspiracy to control you, whatever. God's saying, no, don't don't agree with people when they say this is a conspiracy. I'm telling you the truth. Bad times are coming for both of these kingdoms, and God wasn't joking. Assyria came and destroyed Israel in 722, as we said, and then Babylon came for Israel and took them into exile in 586 BC. All right, let's focus on our second major section here, which is Isaiah 9, 1-7. Again, this was the sermon text for our Christmas Eve service. Let's read these words. Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who are in distress. In the past he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, the two tribes of Israel. But in the future he will honor Galilee of the nations by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan. That is definitely worth noting here. Matthew 4 will make this bigger. It's talking about Jesus. Leaving Nazareth, he went and lived in Capernaum, which is by the lake in the area of Zebulun and Naphtali, to fulfill what was said through the prophet Isaiah. Land of Zebulun, land of Naphtali, the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. People living in darkness have seen a great light, and those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. From that time on, Jesus began to preach, repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near. That is awesome. A very hyper-specific prophecy about this very specific area of Israel. Here, 735 years before Jesus is born, 760 years before his earthly ministry starts as an adult, Isaiah, by the voice of God, is saying he will honor Galilee of the nations, Zebulun and Naphtali, these two tribal areas. Jesus is going to honor these places by walking among them and teaching about himself there. In Matthew 4, again, 700, we'll call it 700, maybe 70, 780 years later, confirms that, yes, Jesus fulfilled this prophecy by going to those areas, that he did preach in those areas, just like Isaiah had said. So words from Isaiah that maybe seemed a little puzzling when they were first written, maybe Isaiah didn't even fully understand them. But now we, with the benefit of the two testaments, get to look back on these and say, wow, very specific prophecy about where Jesus would go in his earthly ministry, and Jesus did it. All right, verse 2, back. So Isaiah 9, verse 2. People walking in darkness have seen a great light, and those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. Every warrior's boot used in battle, and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. Beautiful words that I think we know very well. We'll save our discussion of this for when we actually meet together, but there will be a lot to discuss here. Just to maybe encourage you to think through these two activities beforehand. One is about the imagery. So you have people walking in darkness have seen a great light, harvest, warfare, a reference to Gideon's defeat of the Midianites. We can talk more about that. And then freedom from slavery. So just think of the appeal of that imagery. And then the second one is just walking through those terms that Isaiah uses to describe the Messiah: Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. So how is the Christ child an answer to what people are desperately looking for today? The last two sections are, again, just anger, righteous anger from God. We won't read through Isaiah 9, 8 to 16 now, but it's more of the same. It's God telling the two kingdoms. It's not just the northern kingdom that's getting judgment here. It's God kind of sprinkling in for Judah too. Things are going to be bad for you. The one interesting thing we'll maybe note here is all the people we will know it, Ephraim and its inhabitants of Samaria, who say with pride and arrogance of heart, the bricks have fallen down, but we will rebuild with dressed stone. The fig trees have been felled, but we will replace them with cedars. So God is pointing out that these Israelites, even though they should have been humbled by the disaster taking place, they're still in their pride going to say, no, we'll fix it. We'll actually make it even better than it was. So the bricks fall down, who cares? We'll use even better stone. The fig trees have been felled, we'll replace them with cedars. The cedars of Lebanon were highly coveted trees and building material at the time. So God's saying, I know you. I'm going to destroy you, and still you're going to cling to your pride. So an interesting, a sad commentary, I guess, on human nature. And then his hand is still upraised is the last section that we won't cover, but that's sort of a refrain in these last verses after the great messianic promise at the beginning of chapter 9 is the hand of the Lord is still upraised. So it emphasizes bad things happen over and over again, and when the people think that it's done, it's not. God's hand is still upraised. Now, one of the things we'll talk about, the last question there, is how do we tell people about or explain to people an angry God of the Old Testament? That's a really important thing. We've talked about that before, but it's worth talking through it again. So how do we explain why God is so angry and why that's not a reason for us to give up on him? In fact, quite the contrary. Okay, that's all for this lesson. I hope you'll join us on Thursday night for the Zoom, and God's blessings on your study of this section of Isaiah. Thank you.